I feel like the way into spirituality in that case is through the heart. And I really encourage people to start where they are, like a meditation.
Welcome to the Spirits Beside Us podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lippincott. I'm an ex-Wall Street analyst turned international medium, spiritual teacher, and best-selling author. Each week we'll dive into the fascinating and uplifting arena of the non-physical world to help you deepen your understanding and spiritual connection to the unseen realm. We'll also share a behind-the-scenes look with others who've done the same and speak with experts in the field about their experiences. Pull up a seat and let's dive into these perspective-changing conversations. Welcome back, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Spirits Beside Us. I'm so glad that you've joined us again, and welcome to seeing and discussing more information about spirits and the world of spirit and everything that we have. And today we've got a special guest. Her name is Ashley Torrent, and I just can't wait to dive right into what she does, how she's gotten here, and all the things that she's able to do, both with people and also with spirits. So Ashley, welcome so much.
Thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to reconnect with you.
Yeah, likewise. Well, you and I know each other from a bunch of years back, when we were both in courses with Tony Stockwell and, learning everything about him as well as everything that he does. And that was just so wonderful. But you've also been doing much more than just learning about spirituality. You're also into a great healing modality. In fact, one of our prior guests, quite well, and are doing something very similar. So tell us what you're doing and perhaps try to explain it in a way that I'll understand it.
Yeah, no, that would be good. Well, I'm a psychospiritual therapist. So basically what that means is I weave together psychology and spirituality, which is not very common. You would think it would be a lot more common. I think it is becoming more common. And what I'm finding is that people are craving their spirituality mixed with their therapy. And so I've been doing this for about 18 years now. And it's been really interesting to see where the growth in this, where I always kind of felt like I was ahead of my time when I started. And but now people are really into it. And recently, well, in addition, I'm also a medium. So, which means that depending on the client, I often will bring my intuitive guidance or mediumship skills in intentionally and more transparently if the client wants. Some clients don't really have a spiritual relationship, aren't aware of spirit, or don't want to talk about it. So I don't bring it in until they're ready, because that's not my job to force that on them. I think that kind of thing can be a real turnoff. But it's really beautiful when the client wants some intuitive guidance or wants to connect to their own intuition or wants mediumship and wants to connect to a loved one on the other side of the spirit guides. And I was telling you earlier that the dynamics of the session are very different. Like the energy is really exciting. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. But the other thing I also do is I began teaching a class called Finding Magic in the Mundane. So I teach people to connect to their intuition. And I'm kind of changing my work a bit, moving out of counseling and more into teaching, because I really want to help people connect to this like divinity within them and their magic, right? Their intuitive nature, their ability to connect to the other side, their spirit guides. So I feel like I have a foot in both worlds, like the human experience and the spiritual experience. And I want to build a bridge for people. And I feel like therapy is a beautiful way to do that.
That's great. That's great. So for you, which came first? Did you find that you were entering the therapy space first and then the mediumship came? Or did you find that the mediumship was already there and you wanted to add therapy to it?
Therapy definitely came first.
Okay.
My relationship to spirituality was a slow evolution. And part of it was because I grew up Christian fundamentalist and I was really turned off by the idea of God or, something bigger. And I came from, abusive household. I have, a relationship to complex trauma is how I like to phrase it, rather than label myself as like I have complex trauma, which I do, but it was in my healing that spirituality grew and became like a lifeline in my healing. And it was when I was doing a Reiki session that the other side came, maybe like 15 years ago. I was doing Reiki, I was working on a client, and two beings from the other side came through. And I was like, whoa, I don't know what this is. And then I forgot about it till like 10 years later.
Yeah. It's so funny. I've heard so many stories about people conducting some kind of Reiki session on a client, and they're not even thinking about spirituality. They're not even thinking about the spirit world. Next thing they know, a spirit loved one comes through, and they're like, "Who is this? And what do you? Why are you here?" And then
Right.
sometimes they'll go with it, and sometimes they'll just say, "I'm not so sure if you want to know this, but I'm getting these people who say they know you."
Yeah. And I went with it, which was really fascinating to me to think about how natural it was like all those years ago. And then when I forgot about it and I began studying it, I made it so much more complicated, which I think is what the mind does. The mind is like, oh, this must be hard rather than this natural thing. So I remember struggling with believing that I could do it and understanding it. And then I had to look back and go, okay, wait, that was very seamless before. So let's not make this harder than it has to be.
Yes. Oh, that suddenly rings a bell. It's like I can remember the first couple of years when I was doing my mediumship. It would flow before anybody was saying, okay, here's the structure, here's what you've got to be doing, and here are all the wonderful things we should be doing. It just flowed, and then all of a sudden I mucked it up by thinking, okay, well, it's got to do this, and I got to do this, and let me try to do this, and I'm thinking, and so that it kind of went into this nadir of muck.
Yeah.
It just all fell to pieces. And then eventually I had to piece it all back together again. I'm like, okay, it came out the other side better, I guess.
Well, I think that's a really good point. I think this natural thing, our mind gets in the way, and then we can try to make it look like someone else's. And then we usually end up coming back to our natural way of doing it. And when I teach, one of the things that's really important to me, I try to give the basics, but the practical piece, the experience of practicing on each other is such a important part of the class, so people can figure out, oh, this is how I do it. Because I don't want to put my way on anyone. I don't want to write of the Torrent method of mediumship. I have no interest in that. What I really want is for people to understand that we all have our unique relationship to intuition and connecting to the other side or to our spirit guides. And how can I be a catalyst to supporting you understanding what that is?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the one thing. So I remember when I was first taking classes, it was they had to teach us, okay, well, here's the things you should be looking for. Here's the things you have to be doing.
Right.
So I thought to myself, okay, I'll do those things. And I remember it was like a poster board of, okay, I got to do this, A, B, C, D, E, and just everything from there. That's when everything just kind of fell apart. And eventually, to your point, I just kind of said, forget it. I'm throwing the papers out the window. I'm just going to go back to it my way. But then the stuff that I remembered and the stuff that stuck with me, that's what helped. And so the things I always tell my students is take what you need, leave what doesn't resonate.
Exactly. And I don't know about you. One of the things I loved about Tony's classes is he took some of the rigidity that some styles of mediumship could be, I found really rigid and formal. And he took that rigidity and threw it out the window, and he made it really lighthearted and fun and brought humor to it. And I'm personally a little rebellious. I like to watch something and then I like to make it my own. So I really loved his classes because I feel like he encouraged that, take the structure, take the basics, take the intention and the understanding, but then you do you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. And I think that was why so many of us resonated when we were, either with his class or hearing him or learning with him. And that's what really pulled us, some people like that. Some people don't. Some people need that structure.
Yeah.
When you're with your clients, you mentioned that you sort of allow them to grow or into that relationship, perhaps with spirituality, if it's right for them. How do you, or I should say, how does a client find themselves expanding into a space where they realize I would like to expand into spirituality when I didn't even think it existed before?
Well, I think one of the things I notice is like there might be a cycle of lessons unlearned.
Mm.
You see people meeting the same like issue type of person situation over and over again. And they're like, why does this keep happening to me? And I feel like that's a beautiful opportunity to say, well, let's ask a bigger question. Like, if everything's a teacher, or why do you think we're here? What are we here to do? I start like asking questions about purpose. I try to change the view from such a like micro view to more of a macro view. And that's when I start to notice they start to expand. Oh, I never thought of it that way. And I can really feel like the hunger in them. In my own experience and what I've seen with clients is suffering is such a beautiful teacher. I don't think we have to suffer to learn, but I do feel like, especially when we're early on our path, suffering is a catalyst for transformation. It's a calling. Humans, I don't feel really evolve unless they're a little bit uncomfortable. And usually what I notice is we become a little bit uncomfortable and then we get more uncomfortable and then we're really uncomfortable and we start asking bigger questions and we start seeking help. And it's in those moments I notice people are ripe for change. They're ripe for something bigger. And like I said, intuitively, I can feel like this might be a time. It's not that I have an agenda, but what I notice is once people start to expand and understand there's something bigger, or they have their own intuition inside of themselves, or they understand that they're here to evolve and connect to their soul, and they start to feel comforted. They start to feel hopeful. They start to feel like they're not alone. So it is a lifeline in a lot of ways. And they can feel it. It's palpable, right? That's the thing. I mean, you may notice this when you're teaching, but the energy of the room is palpable. The change in the room is palpable when we're all connecting. And people don't forget that feeling.
Yeah, and the energy just starts to really rise and everybody can feel it. Yeah.
Rise. Yeah. We did a practice. I was hosting a retreat in Costa Rica and we did it in like a beginning intuitive practice. And I went outside. Costa Rica is already gorgeous, right? We went outside after that practice and I was like, holy cow. It was like the jungle was vibrating. And I don't do like drugs or anything, but what had occurred to me, it was like, love is a psychedelic. Everything was like 1,000 times more beautiful, if you can imagine, in Costa Rica. And it was just like humming. It was wild.
And that's exactly what spirit tells us happens on the other side, is that everything is at that much more of a vibration. So when love, the highest vibration emotion already, is accessed, that's going to make everything else vibrate at that same rate. So that's probably what you were experiencing. The colors, the feelings, the love, everything was just like vibrating at that highest possible vibration in the physical.
Yeah, and it wasn't just me. Other people were walking out going, whoa. And it was so cool to see their reaction and that they felt it.
Yeah, exactly. Either that, or maybe it was just the fact they were going from a dark room to the outside. And they're like, whoa. I don't know. Just saying. So it's such an amazing thing. You were a second ago talking about, personal growth and people noticing that, they've got to get uncomfortable and there's a catalyst for change. And that immediately made me think of the concept that in order for a person to grow, they have to step outside their comfort zone, which I think is kind of what you were talking about. Kind of talking about, we're comfortable in this. Maybe we're even comfortable in the fact that we're used to the discomfort. Whether it's discomfort, suffering, whatever it is, we're used to that because we know it and we can deal with it because it's something that the mind doesn't want change. As soon as we step out of that, we become uncomfortable, but that's the growth. So the growth is stepping out of the old into the new. Is that something you also find with clients? They're growing as they step out of, their own comfort zone?
Well, yeah, you reach a point where you just can't stay the same. Like you can't stay in the same situation or the same relationship or keep moving through the world the same, but it's scary to know that you have to grow. So I always think of it as your growing edge. Your growing edge is scary, sometimes terrifying, but not in the way of terrifying, like horror movie terrifying, I'm going to die terrifying. It's terrifying in a way that like stretches us. It asks us to believe in something more. It asks us to try something new. But on the other side of that growing edge is so much joy. And I often a metaphor I like to use is surfing. I surf and I love to surf, and it's helped me so much with my relationship to fear. And, surfing puts you back in the food chain, as my husband says. You're in this huge ocean. There's all sorts of creatures in the ocean. You also don't necessarily know what kind of the ocean is going to respond. Some days it's big, sometimes it's small. But what they've seen is that being in the ocean and surfing, it works with fear in a way that you access what they call blue brains. There's just enough fear and enough joy that you experience this state in your brain that's like blissful. But you can't experience if you don't have a little bit of fear. And what I love about surfing is it's scary, not always, but it's often scary. It's the unknown. But the joy you experience of riding the wave outweighs the fear of entering that ocean.
Is that the definition of exhilaration? Exhilaration would have both a little bit of fear and bliss mixed together?
I imagine. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's great. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's amazing now to think that you can feel exhilaration as you expand into a new space, into a new concept, as you're growing, going into the beyond where you have, not the beyond as in the spirit world, but you're going into this next phase of your growth, the next phase of your life should be exhilarating when most people are just deathly afraid of it and they don't want to leave. They're so fixed, they don't want to move.
Right.
Do you find a lot of resistance from people just like, oh, I just don't want to go beyond my comfort zone?
I think initially, but like I said, the discomfort of staying in the same situation becomes just intolerable. I have had people reach a point where they've said, I know what I need to do and I'm not ready to do it. And they've paused on therapy because every time they show up, I'm a reminder of the thing that they can't choose for themselves. And what I've seen is just like the situation gets worse or it stays the same. But I don't think you can evolve if you're choosing that, if you're consciously choosing suffering over and over again, and there's a difference. But when I notice people step outside their comfort zone and they experience the just expansiveness of trying something new, that reward keeps them going. They remember it. It's a visceral experience. And I think this is a beautiful thing about like healing trauma. I think so often we reinforce those scary narratives like the world isn't safe, this isn't safe. So if we show up to a situation and it doesn't go the way we imagined, we go C, nothing works out my way, or C, humans are scary, or C, relationships fail. But I feel like what really helps to heal trauma is when we do those things that bring us joy that are a bit scary. And we reinforce that narrative, see, I can do scary things and have fun. I can step outside my comfort zone and I'm okay. But the brain has a tendency towards the negative. So often we don't rewrite that new narrative to show us that like there's another possibility, right?
Right. Interesting. So at what point, you mentioned that occasionally you'll see clients begin to expand to something bigger than themselves, which opens them to the possibility of connecting with spirit. And you begin to, discuss those concepts. How do you then begin to discuss with clients the spirituality, the spirit? Perhaps it's their loved ones, or perhaps it's guides that come in. How do you begin to discuss that with people who, maybe that itself was the fear factor? They were, maybe their family said, "Oh yeah, no, mediums are evil," or or whatever.
What I think I find is I start with the intuition piece because that's something that people can relate to. I think, I won't say everybody, but more often than not, people will agree that we have intuition. But they often don't understand how theirs worked or they doubt it, right? So I'll start asking them, well, what do you feel? If you like go to your heart, and I try to guide them and start developing a relationship to their heart. Because so many people are not in their bodies. They're in their heads. They don't even know that feelings live in their bodies. So the first thing I have to do is get someone to connect to their body. Where my feelings live, what am I feeling? And then we can connect to the heart and start like having a relationship to the heart. And then we can introduce like the idea of intuition. The heart is the voice of the soul. And people will have memories of being a kid and their parents or people around them saying, oh, that's not true, you don't know that, or talking them out of it. but they still know something. They know something's true and they'll have memories. I was right. And then we connect to like, did you notice there were red flags or things happening in that relationship that you ignored? So I try to help, like, we're working with the human and the soul. I really try to move at the human's pace, the digestible bits that they're ready for. But that's the way in. You can't go into spirituality or soul or intuition unless you've connected them to their body and their heart, right?
You
And
gotta start
what
somewhere.
would you say?
You gotta start somewhere.
And everyone has a different relationship. Some people are like, I know I'm intuitive, I have spirit guides, but they believe that, oh, other people can do it, I can't. And I'm a big believer that everyone can do all these things, that these are our spiritual gifts. They're here for a reason. We can connect mediumistically, we can connect to spirit guides. We're all intuitive. So I try to bring it back to them and like help them find that beautiful still place within them that's like their internal guidance system. And once you start introducing that, they get more and more curious. Well, what about spirit guides? Well, what about my friend who's passed, And then they'll say, sometimes I feel them around. And I'm like, what does that feel like? And then we kind of go from there.
Okay. So do you then introduce clients to mediumistic readings, or is that something completely separate?
I normally keep it separate unless I sometimes have clients who come to me for a reading and then become a client. And so sometimes they'll say, can we do a mediumistic reading today? Like I have a client I'm going to see this week and it's her birthday. And so every year we do an intuitive reading on her birthday. Sometimes they'll know that I'm a medium and they'll bring it in and say, can we do a mediumistic reading or can we just check in and see who's there? And then with some who I know are on a spiritual path and we've talked about intuition, I'll say, do you mind if I check in intuitively about this? I feel like something's coming through, but I always ask permission because I feel like that's important. I always am very clear. Is this me talking from my human or am I getting information from somewhere else that's coming through? And I always say, would it be okay if I shared this? And they're like, yeah.
Yeah, because that's very important to point out is that you have to ask that permission to somebody before you start, unlike a famous TV personality who does not do that and walks up to others and donates that information. What?
Right, not okay. And I think the thing that I didn't before I started mediumship, I didn't understand how much I was using my intuition in therapy because we're all intuitive. And I think for some of us, we used our intuition to survive, rather than thrive. Now I'm in a place where my intuition is a thriving tool, not a survival tool. But when we started studying like psychic ability, I remember thinking, ooh, that scares me. I don't know how to do that. But I would sit with clients and I was like, I'm doing this all the time. Like I would hear words and they would say the words. I would feel something in my body and they would say, I have a stomach ache. I have a headache. I would have questions come through that I wanted to ask. And so I started noticing that like my training was in one hand and my intuition was the other. And I was kind of juggling back and forth between them. So I don't necessarily, like if I have a question come through, I don't say, I have an intuitive question that's coming through. But if I have information that's coming through, that's when I'll be obvious. But sometimes I just intuitively will hear like, we need to look at this relationship. It's not, it doesn't feel supportive or something like that.
Okay. So how about your own journey on the spiritual path, the mediumistic path? When do you recall, your early connections to spirit? What were they like? I mean, you mentioned you grew up in a certain environment that perhaps may not have necessarily been so fostering of spirituality and connecting to spirit. So how did you get there? Go from there to the realm of opening up to spirit.
Yeah, well, I remember playing intuitive games as a kid, like can I intuit when the light's going to turn red or green? Even though I didn't know what I was doing. And I remember being able to know when people were not safe to be around and when they were okay, but I couldn't consciously like say I was intuiting that or whatever. So for most of my childhood, I was pretty dissociated. So I don't have any of those stories of talking to spirits from the other world or visiting with angels or guides. Like I was pretty checked out. And the religion I was brought up with made me pretty scared. Like I was constantly asking, am I a Christian? Am I a Christian? Am I a Christian? Because, I didn't feel the thing that they described. Like it felt like literal language, but it's not literal language. You know what I mean? Like asking Jesus into your heart. To me, you're supposed to feel something. And so I was always like, I don't feel it. I don't feel it. So I remember like not connecting to it in that way and just having a lot of questions and seeing a lot of hypocrisy between the way people were living their life and the things they said they believed. And that was very upsetting to me. So when I left home, I was like, I'm done. I didn't want to say the word God. I didn't want to hear about it. That just was done. And then my husband, when I first met him, the first book he introduced me to was Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And that it makes me emotional. That blew my mind. That was so like a breath of fresh air. I was like, this I can do. But I was still a bit resistant. And then I went to the psychospiritual training program and we studied intuition. And from the exercises we did, I understood I was intuitive and empathic, but I didn't have a relationship to spirit. It was mediumship that I really think that's why it came into my life. Do I think it came into my life so I could be of service? Yes. And to teach? Yes. But I think one of the main reasons it came into my life was to help me have that relationship with the divine, to help me expand that relationship and to see how important it was. And it was like just the universe became so magical through mediumship. It just changed the way I saw things, the way I saw people, the way I saw myself. So it hasn't been that long, really. I mean, it's been about 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
But I was a late bloomer.
well, that's what I find. I find that so many mediums either had a little inkling of something as a child, or occasionally they'll have some thing, but it gets suppressed, and that they don't really bring out their full gifts until they're an adult. They don't really develop those gifts until they're an adult. There's some catalyst of some kind that brings them over the edge, kind of brings them into the full light, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, and it was my friend here when I moved to Charleston, my friend, she kept saying to me, "You're a medium. I know you're a medium." And I was like, "I don't think so. I'm not a John Edwards. I don't do that. No." And I was really resistant. And she would put books on my front doorstep. She would leave me bags of books and I would read them and I'd give them away. But it was Laura Lynn Jackson's book, The Light Between Us.
Yes.
That I was like, I can do that. I can believe in that. That's like my jam.
Yeah, it was the exact same thing that happened to me. I saw her book on a giant billboard as I was going to work one day, and I memorized the name. I don't know why. Spirit obviously put the billboard right in front of me so I could remember it because I didn't have good memory. And it was from then on, it was just like, drinking water from a fire hose.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, she just had such a beautiful exclamation and delivery. And I appreciated the way she talked about her work. Like, I didn't feel like there was a lot of ego in it. She just was really lovely. I just love that book. So I always recommend it to people. If you want to see what you believe and explore, this is a great book to start.
Yeah, exactly. That's that. Yeah, I'm not quite so sure why it happened, other than all I can probably say, to me, it was that Spirit that threw it right in front of me, so I wouldn't. It's one of those things that you cannot miss. It's like you're staring at it, you're like, why?
Right?
So I keep on saying that Spirit was beating me over the head for years until I finally picked up the signal.
Isn't that funny? It's kind of like my friend's book. So I was like, no, 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 no. And then it was like, okay, this one.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, the Spirit was very patient with me. Very patient.
Oh.
It clearly is like, for years and years and years, they were trying to do it to me as a kid. And then I said, nah, and then suppress it for a bunch of decades. And they're just going to say, okay, we're just going to bide our time. And then they started, doing the little breadcrumb trails of all these books that I started reading, slowly, until finally it's like, boom. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it.
Isn't that amazing? They're very gentle but persistent.
Yes, they are. That's what's so amazing about it. So perhaps for those of people who are either listening or maybe even your clients, you can say, Spirit is exactly that. They're very gentle, but they will be persistent with you. So just relax. There's nothing to fear about them, because that was my other thing. When I was beginning to develop, I always had this deathly fear of the Hollywood ghost story and all that. So that was, for me, that was the thing that kind of threw me off. I'm like, I don't want to deal with ghosties. No, I can't do that.
Right.
So, yeah. So
that's beautiful.
So where are you with your relationship now with spirit? Are you finding that it's more of a call into service to kind of complement everything that you've been doing? Is that kind of how you sort of see your relationship with spirit?
I mean, it's a way of life for sure. And I mean that like I think at some point it just naturally becomes a way of life, living an intuitive life, checking in, honoring that soul. I always imagine my soul and my human are walking hand in hand and we're like co-creating this life together. And spirituality has been such an important part of my healing. And interestingly enough, it keeps me grounded. It keeps me grounded into my human experience, which you think it wouldn't. But I think because I was so dissociated and disembodied and just experienced so much trauma that I didn't want to be in my human body, I really rejected this life. And I really felt, I was suicidal at one point. I just felt like I don't belong here. And now I love being here. And I really understand like this place has purpose. It has meaning. I can understand like why. It doesn't mean I don't suffer. It doesn't mean there aren't hard times, but the context of it all is so different.
Hmm. Is that something very much along the lines that we often hear spirit teaching us that as we live in this physical world, we learn so many lessons, and that one of the purposes of this life is to learn those different lessons as we go through our days. From perhaps to your point, we start out in this terrible suffering and this terrible problematic kind of life where we don't really want to be in that life, to the point where we start learning the lessons of, okay, now I know why I've gone through that period of really tough time, and I've gone through that period of whatever it is. That something that you think about?
I definitely do. I mean, I think there's an evolution that happens, and I think a lot of people go through it that way. I feel like, and you asked me, at this point, is it to be of service? I feel like I've been going through a period of feeling, really recognizing the beauty in the world and feeling so expansive and so joyful, but also grieving for the human experience of how hard it is, and grieving for others and my clients, and feeling like, there's a part of me that's been like, what do I want to do next? Do I even want to I feel so content, so peaceful. Like I got a reading yesterday and I was like, a part of me just wants to walk into the woods and grow flowers and I'm good. But she was like, yeah, but I said, but my soul is like, no, we're not done.
Yeah.
So I feel like what is next as far as that relationship is service, but I feel like it's in a different way, and that's transforming and changing. So I'm in the process of writing a book proposal and hoping that I can use my voice in different ways, and along with the readings and the teaching and things. But yeah, so it's a relationship. And also I do feel like it's a responsibility in the way I live to be a model of like, how do we navigate this human life and be spiritual people where we're not so like called woo-woo and, floating in the clouds? Because I find a lot of people they have no interest in that. And I can totally understand why.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's a part of my purpose is to, and it sounds weird to say, ground spirituality, to make it accessible, to make this beautiful thing accessible to everyone. And it's not just for special people. And it's not so you can float away and avoid the human experience, but learn to dance between the two worlds.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that was very much of, when I wrote my book, the whole concept that I realized after the fact, that why Spirit had me write it, was the fact that, I came from Wall Street, and then suddenly the next thing I know, I'm a medium. What? Excuse me? What?
Right.
Wait a second. I know I'm a Gemini, and I know I have two personalities, but that's just a little extreme.
Yeah.
But
that's wild.
But to your point, yes, Spirit's trying to kind of get us all to understand that it's spirituality and spirit. We are spirits walking on this physical earth. It's not some, magic up in the clouds. It's, it's reality. It's here. You look, and that was why I also brought in quantum physics. We are all energy. Quantum physics has proven that. Everybody thinks, okay, well, I'm touching my arm. That's not your arm. That's just the energy you're feeling.
Right.
So I try to explain that to people, and they're like, what? I don't get that.
Yeah. It's like little bites, right? Like making it digestible and accessible. You're a Gemini. When's your birthday? I am too.
Oh, the 13th.
Oh, I'm the 29th of May.
All right. So you're close. All right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's so sometimes you'll notice that I can be two very different people, but I try to keep each opposite foot talking to each other, so I don't get completely out this way, which would be that would be a problem. So what else? I know a lot of times people are wondering, how can I connect to spirit? A lot of, I think you touched on this earlier. A lot of people say, "Oh, well, I don't have the gift. How can I connect to spirit?" What would your, thoughts be to somebody who's thinking along those lines? I don't have the gift. I can't talk to spirit. Maybe my mom's in, spirit. I can't talk to her. I can't do that. What would you say?
Mm. Well, like I said earlier, I feel like the way into spirituality in that case is through the heart. And I really encourage people to start where they are, like a meditation. And some people can do sitting meditations, but I, being someone who I need the energy to ground a bit, I have to walk. I have to walk in nature or be doing something to move the energy. But really start with your heart, whatever feels good, whether it's sitting still or movement. But what's hanging out there? Like what's hanging out in your human heart? Because I feel like before we can get to like the love, well, the way I like to describe it is, that feeling after you've cried and your heart opens and your just vision and your energy feels more expansive, more grounded. You feel a little bit safer. You feel a little bit more okay. That to me is like when the first time someone can often feel like there is something bigger, because you feel a love so powerful that you actually know you're going to be okay. And what I notice often, it's usually through those human feelings that get discharged and move out of the heart space or out of the body, where we can finally land into a calm, still place. And then we kind of go, oh, there's something else besides the fear, besides the anxiety, besides the self-doubt, I actually feel love here. And to me, that love is the conduit to that spiritual connection. And so often I feel like it's through the human heart. For others, they might be able to connect a lot easier. They could go for a walk and just ask, who's there, and might feel something. They might feel chills on their arms when an answer comes through. They might hear their intuition. But I feel like the most palpable feeling is that like going into the heart and like hearing the voice of the soul speak through it. Does that make sense?
Totally. And in fact, it's actually quite accurate to your point, because that's how spirit connects with us. They
Right.
literally connect through our heart.
Yeah.
Whether it's in trance or whether it's actually in a mediumistic reading, they come to the medium through the heart. So the heart
Yeah.
is like the control center, if you will, for all the connection. Everybody thinks,
well, it's the cross section.
yeah.
Would you say?
I was saying everybody thinks it's through the crown. Like, well, the crown does have a connection, yes, but you're going to feel the emotions, the clairsentience, the feelings, all that. That's why they're coming through your heart, so you can feel that part.
Yeah, well, I like to think of it as your cross section between your humanity and your divinity.
Yes.
And that's where you do feel it. That's where it does come through you. And so that to me is like that feeling after like a good cry when everything feels like it's going to be okay. To me, that's like an introduction for someone,
That would be especially good for guys, because guys don't cry, right?
Some guys, I'll add, some guys don't.
Well, that's been the big thing, is like, guys, it's like I think, speaking for most guys, they feel so vulnerable. It's like, well, if I cry, then my world crumbles. Then I got nothing left. But to your point, once you get that out, then not only do you kind of feel vulnerable, but then you move to a whole different space completely.
Well, right. It's that vulnerability that opens us up to receive, I mean, intuition is such a feminine energy of surrendering, receiving, trusting. And so often we're in that masculine energy of like seeking answers. I'm going to go after something. And so that's one way I describe it to people. It's like asking your practical mind and your fear and doubt to step aside and moving into a space of your heart and just imagine and softening a bit and softening your gauge. But you really are surrendering and trusting. And the feminine energy is powerful, but it's powerful in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very powerful, and that's why the famous two words in mediumship, trust and surrender, are so critical. And that's the feminine energy, but it's so powerful that that's how we connect, and that's what spirit is basically asking us to do: trust and
Yeah.
surrender to all that information, that everything that's there, and that's when everything becomes okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's just I feel like in doing readings or in my own practice, it's just a letting go, a trusting and a surrendering even more, and even more, because our world asks us to be in the masculine, you know? We're not asking to be in that vulnerable space, you know, it asks us to be in the masculine energy. So there's a palpable shift when we intentionally do it.
Yeah. And all the time, and perhaps this goes to your psychospiritual training, all the time, humans are always trying to put up some kind of defense, psychological defense, some kind of wall to
Yeah.
protect themselves from the perceived threat or the actual threat of what's out there, so that they don't get hurt. You know, it's the ego talking. I'm going to put up the
Yeah.
barrier so I don't get hurt. And then that's that one barrier. If anything, I would call the quote unquote veil between spirit and human is the ego.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the wall.
Right. I think people think of it as like, well, spirits put up a veil. I'm like, no, we've put up the veil.
It's our veil. Once we take away that veil, and we take away that ego wall, all of a sudden, you know, we can, because we're a spirit, we can immediately talk to spirit, and they're right beside us. You take away that ego mind, and guess what? Hey, you're right there. What a
You're
surprise.
right there. Yeah. That's such a great way to put it.
It's so amazing the number of times when you just suddenly allow that ego mind to go away. And that's the big thing, is that the ego mind does not want to let go. Its whole job is, ever since you were a child, was to control, and to defend. If all of a sudden you tell the ego mind, I don't want you, I don't need you, it suddenly feels threatened, and then there's double time.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things to help people understand, like my clients, is we live so often in service to the ego and the personality self. But what if our personality, because I do feel like if the personality is in service to the soul, that could be really beautiful. And I think as mediums, when we're in readings, that's what we're doing. We're taking our personality self and then our spirit self are working together. But I do believe we're supposed to be living in service to the soul. And the world is so opposite.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, it just sort of seems that every day it just keeps on getting worse and worse and worse. It's like, no more. I kind of want to, go do what you were just about to talk to, go out in the forest and, dance, amongst the trees. That's what I did as a kid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is this feeling of like, it reminds me, I was saying to that woman giving me a reading yesterday that it feels like a dysfunctional family. And I left my dysfunctional family. So there is this part of me that's like, peace out. I'm tired. I don't know how to be of service in this way. It feels like it's just going down. And then what I got to is like, part of my expansion is to learn to be the love, to be me in the midst of this, and to not have to just say peace out, but to how do I actually stay of service, to be connected, and just know that I just get to be me in this. And that is of service, right? Yeah. But there is this like wanting, I just got to this place of like, I feel really good. I'm good.
Yeah, exactly. I'm good. Hey, put me on my board, get me out on the water, wax down.
So you get it, right?
Oh yeah. Hey man, I'm there. You don't need to be Cheech and Chong. You just get your board, you're good.
Well, what's interesting, one of the things I understood is that like in some ways, like as a therapist or even as a medium, I can become, and understand when I say this, too invested in how my clients evolve or grow. And so when I see potential in someone and they can't make the choice or they can't grow or they can't make that decision to get them out of a suffering situation, I become a little enmeshed in their experience and it becomes tiring, if you know what I mean. And so what I realized is like, I wasn't letting spirit in enough of those sessions to trust that like, hey, the love's got them. Their soul has them. I was working too hard. And that was burning me out a bit. So what I've really come to realize is like my next expansion is to trust in their own divinity a bit more and to step back a bit. And that can be hard.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's got to be very tough. So, let's talk about, what people can do now also just to sort of help themselves. Let's say they are in a place of pain. Maybe they are in a place of discomfort and they know they want to stop the pain, stop the discomfort. And they do realize there is something bigger out there. They do realize there is, other potential, maybe spirit, maybe something else. What would you say to those people who, want to kind of experience that growth, get out of the comfort and move on?
Well, I would say, if you like to read, start reading. If you like to listen to podcasts, start listening, exploring different places that are talking about this. Find a coach, a therapist, a guide, a teacher. But one of the most important things is really pay attention to how that person you're seeking to support you, how that podcast, how that person you're following on social media, how you feel in your body when you're listening to them or you're reading their book, because energy is all over. Social media, like if you're on someone's page, you can feel that person's energy. How does it feel to you? Does it feel good? Or does it feel kind of yuck? Does it feel like they're not really in alignment? Pay attention. If you're seeking someone who says there's something, when you sit with them, does it feel good and safe? Like, I think we so often, look, healers of all kinds, there's some good ones and there's some bad ones. Plenty of spiritual people, as we know, are out of alignment. There's a lot of spiritual bypassing. There's a lot of therapists that aren't in alignment, right? And what you really want to feel is the congruency in someone's message and how you feel in their presence. And so I just would really encourage people to pay attention to that. And I don't think we're doing it enough. And I think one thing that's wrong is sometimes we know we're out of alignment and we will start following people on social media who mirror that lack of alignment. And rather than notice it, we kind of be like, that's our person, that's our guy or our girl. And they're actually kind of just mirroring back like, yeah, let's be out of alignment together. Does that make sense? And it's this unspoken energetic exchange. So really pay attention. Like, you have a responsibility in who you choose to listen to, who to be with. And just, does that feel good to you or not? And I think so often we've been taught to not pay attention to those cues, especially if we grew up in families that denied our intuition and, maybe had secrets and lies or gaslighting. So we've learned to lie to ourselves.
Yeah. I think that you hit the nail on the head. So many people are deceiving themselves, whether it's, again, the ego has learned to do that as protection, or that's just, what they're used to.
Yeah.
There's so many people who are deceiving themselves, fooling themselves into thinking that this is what they either should be or how they should be acting based on, society telling them what to do, that they ignore what they really feel deep down inside, because there's so many layers that have built up. It's like cakes of mud are covering them, and pretty soon you can't see through the mud.
Mm-hmm. Right. And what you want to feel is hopeful, or you want to feel love or calmer when you're with those things. Like, I remember my first therapist, man, she just recapitulated so much of my wounding, and I just left there feeling like more and more wounded and hurt after our sessions. And then I went to a new therapist, and this woman hugged me when I walked in the door. I would leave there feeling hopeful. Now, I didn't always want to go because it was hard, but I knew I was safe, right? And there's a difference between feeling like I walk out of this therapy session and, God, I feel terrible and like something's wrong with me, versus someone mirroring my innate goodness and feeling like I still don't feel great inside, but I feel safe and this person obviously cares about me.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal.
That's huge. Yeah. And seeking that positivity, seeking that love, seeking that light. And if you can feel the positivity, the love, the light, then you're heading in the right direction, because it's all magnetic energy anyway.
Yeah. Well, and if you go to a psychic or a medium and you feel scared afterwards, that is a huge red flag. And I think there's too many people using fear to manipulate people and manipulate the messages. And I just am like, if you don't feel good after that session, or you haven't had the experience of love, now you may not like what they say. Sometimes inconvenient truth comes through. And that's like, oh, yeah, they hit the nail on the head. I've been staying in this relationship too long. But you shouldn't feel scared, right? And do you know, like, do you
Yeah,
feel that way too?
yeah, totally. That's so true. It's like fear is the mirror opposite of love.
Mhm.
Those are the two opposite extremes. So if you're feeling fear, then that's the total opposite of love, and everything else is just a gradation between the two.
Yep.
So definitely you want to be feeling love and or positivity as opposed to fear and negativity. So
Right.
make sure because it's really only two poles. Make sure
Yeah.
you know your head in the right pole. It's not that difficult.
No. But again, sometimes people are used to feeling bad and being around people that
Yes.
reinforce that, like, not so great feelings, that they don't know the difference. So maybe if we talk about it, then they'll hear it and go, oh, yeah, I went to that psychic or that therapist and that felt awful.
Right. Right. It's the feeling inside. You know, do you feel innately positive, filled with light, filled with love, filled with something that's making you feel better
Hmm.
or not?
Right.
It's what do you feel? And if you feel better, head that direction. If you feel worse, avoid it like the plague.
Exactly.
I think that's kind of how I would boil it down in like the most simplest term possible.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
the scary thing is, you would think people would innately know that, but to your point, they've probably
They
been
don't.
so they become so used to this one path that it's like they've worn a rut, or they're now an automaton. They
Yep.
can't get out of it. It's like the rut is so deep. How do I get out of that rut? And like
Yeah.
that's where you were talking about earlier. I need a lifeline. Well,
Yeah.
make sure that lifeline is strong enough to pull you up into that positive space.
Hmm. I mean, I stayed with that therapist for 2 years and was really completely unaware of how much damage she was doing
Mm.
to me until I brought my boyfriend, who is now my husband, to a session, and he was like, you need a new therapist.
It does take an expert, the other person, the other pair of eyes to say,
No, this isn't good. I know this isn't my business, but this isn't good.
no, I can see what's happening here, and I'm no pro, but guess what? I think you could probably do better.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. And I think also, spirit is probably involved there as well. I would think spirit would, if you allow yourself just to be open to your intuition and, just say, hey, okay, let me know whether I'm getting a ringing in my ear or a tingling in my heart or, something on my skin or just what's going on. Open up to spirit, and they'll also give you the direction. They'll be like the people on the airport with those orange wands, saying, "Yeah,
Yes.
they'll direct you which way to go." They're like, "Okay, the runway's over here. Go that way."
Exactly. Eventually, like, if you're paying attention and asking for support and help, then you will get the signs.
Exactly. So it's just open your eyes, look for the orange wands from spirit, and they will wave you in the right direction.
Right?
I don't think I've ever said that about you, Spirit, but hopefully you're laughing. I know Spirit's got a great sense of humor, and that's what I love about
Totally.
Spirit.
Yeah, if you want to feel spirit, laugh. I love when there's laughter before a reading. It's like, and when I've had students like struggle and not believe in their mediumship and I've made them laugh before, the connection goes so fast.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'll be in mediumship circles, and we're laughing. So before the circle, we were laughing so hard, we're all crying. Our faces are wet with tears because we're laughing so hard, and the energy is just gone through the roof. It's like you could launch a rocket with our laughter and the energy.
I love that.
And by the time we go into the circle, it's like boom! Within a split second, we are all just like, it's like somebody beat us over the head with a baseball bat with energy, love, and presence. We're like, wow, we can feel that energy coming in. Holy smokes!
Wow, that sounds gorgeous.
Yeah, it's great. In fact, Fred Kluth was also talking about the therapy about laughter yoga.
Mm.
Where I had never heard of laughter yoga before, but now when I think about it, it makes complete sense based on what I just said. It raises the energy. Somebody starts to fake laugh, somebody else then catches on. Laughter is contagious. By the end, everybody's bursting out laughing.
And I bet the poses that you can move into, like, loosen the body. And I bet you, like, you can get in some really cool poses. through the laughter. Not that that's necessarily the intention for laughter yoga, but I would imagine the body loosens up in a way where you're doing like an easy crow pose or something.
Yeah, I imagine you're laughing so hard you could probably get into some positions that you never could get when you're all stiff and
Right.
you just become so loose and like you've let everything out. Wow, that just sounds great. So, what would your one recommendation be? Your biggest recommendation be for a listener at this point who wants to go that next step, wants to go and expand themselves and allow themselves to grow? What would your single biggest recommendation be at this point?
I mean, I would take a class. I would take like a mediumship or intuition class. I feel like the beauty of those is you're in community and you have a guide. I find that like it's one thing to read a book and connect to your intuition, but what I find so often is people like, they don't trust it. And the way you trust it is to practice on someone else. And so like I've found when I have people practice on each other, they start to go, oh my God, I'm doing it. And they start to trust themselves. And so then once they build that trust and they find their way, then they start translating it to their own practice. But I feel like some people, they can trust themselves, but for a lot of people, they doubt it. They're like, I don't know, is this my mind, my intuition? So if you can be in some sort of class where you're guided by a facilitator or in community and you're getting that feedback, like, yeah, it's coming to you, like you're spot on, then you're like, okay, this is how I do it. This is what works for me. This is my intuitive language, because everyone has a different intuitive language. It comes to us in different ways. And so then you build the confidence, and then like you can either deepen that with other people and to be of service, or you can just take it to be your own personal practice.
Right. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I love that idea. It's the community and then internalizing what you've experienced and learned from that perspective from that point on. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Loved having you. It was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, so much fun. Thank you. It was so nice to reconnect with you again.
Oh, absolutely. We've got to keep doing this all the time. I mean, that's what the community's for. We were just talking about community. There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm so glad everybody was able to listen to the show today, and hope you gained a lot of information from what we were talking about. And it certainly was a lively banter back and forth. Hopefully, it was useful for you. So hope you're able to listen again on Wednesday. And if you have anything that you'd like to hear from, or any topics or any guests that you'd like to hear from, by all means, write in and let us know. And on that, what I'll do is send you love and light, and I'll see you next Wednesday. And this is Chris signing off, and see you now.
Thank you.
Bye for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Spirits Beside Us. Make sure you head over to the show notes for all the links and information on this week's episode. You can check it out at spiritsbesideus.com. If you love this episode as much as I did, head over to rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're looking for a community of spiritual seekers like yourself, make sure you join my Facebook page, Spirits Beside Us Podcast on Facebook. This is Chris signing off, sending you love and light. I can't wait to connect with you again on Wednesday.